Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream here on the costumeco channel. And today I have a lovely guest. His name is David Whitethorn. I didn't even know that was your name. I know him as David Lightbringer, and
That's
because
not
he's
my name. That's a joke name. It's
what's
fake.
a joke name?
I'm just a
He's
trader from
yeah,
England, you see,
totally.
and I just came here to do some trading and not any piracy at all. David Whitethorn, that's right.
He's got lots of he has lots of paraphernalia in the
Cannons?
background
Are you
there.
asking about the cannons? Oh, those are self-defense cannons. No, I'm not.
Anyways, David, so nice to have you on. Last week we did a live show talking about uh, Shogun. I love there was actually the recent promo that the voiceover guy goes, Shogun,
Shogun. Yeah.
Shogun, which I think is the proper name. He's supposed to say it, but I'm a Western person, so I just say Shogun. Anyway, David, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a while since I've had you. It's such a pleasure always whenever you're on. And do you want to tell the folks about yourself and before we get going here?
Yeah, I haven't read the Shogun book and I wasn't paying a ton of attention to it beforehand, so I'm very much a Game of Thrones YouTuber watches Shogun. It's the angle I'm coming with. But yeah, I'd cover House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, which are the books behind all that. And I specialize in symbolism and mythology. Those are my sweet spots. So yeah, I've been on Costumeco a few times. We've talked about both Ice and Fire and other things, and it is always fun because, of course, as somebody that's paying attention to the costumes, you're very tuned into at least the visual symbolism. And the visual symbolism always leads you back to the themes. That's where the real symbolism is. So, yeah, we get along really well, Heidi and I am very happy to be here to talk about Shogun because I just don't have. I might cover this show if I had infinite time and multiple channels or something. But I don't. I still do all my own video editing, so I can only do so much. But I'm glad at least to be able to come on here and give a couple of thoughts about it. So yeah, I probably, if it gets continued to season 2, I imagine I might read the book in between and get schooled up for the next season. But yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot at first so far.
Well, and I mean, I kind of like I was poking at David a while ago, saying, David, are you going to be watching Shogun? Because I want to talk to you about it. Because of course, 1899, we were both really big on that show, and we loved Dark as well, which was the same showrunners. And I'm super sad that 1899 didn't get renewed.
When we're a few years out from all this streaming chaos, I think 1899 Heidi will stand as a monument to the insanity of how this was all being run. Like, it's just an unparalleled tragedy, but let's not get us started on 1899.
No, we won't. But just that we have some love for Puzzle Box. This
Very
isn't really
much
a
so.
Puzzle Box show, though. This is pretty straightforward. So what are your first impressions about this show?
Well, my first impression of the show was a tweet about the showrunner or director, I forget which, saying, kind of pushing back against the comparison to Game of Thrones and saying it's more like House of Cards, or I forget what other show he mentioned.
Succession.
I have not watched Succession, but I have watched House of Cards and then obviously Game of Thrones. And my take was just that it reminds me of early season Game of Thrones, but not later seasons. So people probably mean different things when they say or think of comparing stuff to GOT. That's basically what I came away with that. It is similar to some of the early plot stuff. And in particular, there's a beat that A Song of Ice and Fire and Dune both have, which is the whole Ned Stark, Leto Atreides being sent by the government to go to a place that he knows is dangerous and then getting killed for it. There's a similar plot beat in both. And you kind of get that with Tornaga. He doesn't die. He escapes his fate. But it feels a little Ed Stark-like. Just the very first episode with like the guy that's a political prisoner in the Capitol. He might get executed. But thankfully, Tornaga a little more wily than our boy Ned Stark. And he hid inside a box and smuggled his way out of the Capitol. So that was cool.
Agreed. It was funny when we did the live stream last week. I said because I haven't read the book. As a child, I watched the '80s version with my parents. I sat on the floor watching it, and it was a big deal. And hi, Baya, in our house at the time, it was kind of a big deal. my dad and my mom had both read the books. Like it's a saga, so it's sort of like there is a series of books. So it's possibility this could, I've heard word that there probably is going to be a second season based on the
Yeah, I
next
guess the
book.
whole thing is Disney has now bought FX, so it's a matter of what Disney's calculus is. Because typically, this is not the kind of show that Disney goes for. They like stuff that appeals to the four corners, as they, young, old, men and women, everybody. It's right in the middle. That's what they want.
Yeah.
And so this is more like, obviously no children involved here. So we'll see. But what did you hear anything else about that or?
Yeah, I had Dean Eilerston on. He's the props maker, and he said that there is word that there is going to be a second season. So it's called the Asian Saga. So I think the next one is Taipan, and so it's not, hasn't been 100% greenlit, but based on the reviews on this, I don't know what the, obviously they look at the, how many subscribers they get,
watch time, and
it's some kind of weird algorithm thingamajig. So now one of the things I did ask last week, it's interesting, we were talking about earlier seasons of Game of Thrones. I said, because this book was written in the 70s and I had asked, do you think George Martin might have read this book? And do you think, obviously, it's feudal Japan, we could sort of take, it was interesting because I was talking to my husband about this, about how certain things like ships and things like that, like how they would get developed in different parts of the world, never having met each other. And yet, well, I mean, not the ships, because I guess that's the Portuguese, but a lot of the things that happen, a lot of the armors and those types of things would have developed, alongside of each other. And it's interesting how they would oftentimes kind of get to the same place. So this is what I had wondered, if maybe George, had looked at this show, or sorry, the book, I should say, and maybe took some of the inspiration in the same way maybe George Lucas took inspiration from Dune or Kurosawa or that type of thing. What were your thoughts on that? Or am I completely off base there?
So what are you saying is the potential influence on Ice and Fire from Shogun?
Yeah, like, do you think that George, if he might have read these books in the 70s, do you think that he took any type of influence from this? Or do you think that that's
off the top of my head, I don't know, but I haven't even read the books, so I wouldn't know.
Oh, okay, sure.
I just don't know enough of the plot to really say. But I mean,
sure. No, just because when I was watching it, I felt like it had similar, like you mentioned, similar beats. But, I'm just a lowly costume lady, so I don't know.
I think it's feudal politics. I think this is like, there's a certain kind of feel to that political game, and George has captured it well, as far as like everyone's got swords and it's a brutal world, but at the same time, people are also bringing political pressure to bear on each other, trying to back each other in corners and outmaneuver each other with information. And so it's the same sort of dynamic where you can see that some people are completely attached to the warrior way and aren't necessarily thinking strategically enough. And you often see in Shogun, you see the older generation trying to teach the younger generation about politics, or praising certain of the younger generation when they make an astute observation. So you can see like power is military, but also very extremely political. And then there's this subtle shifting game involved too. And we can talk about the whole honor, the way that they view honor and life and death and all that kind of stuff. But I think that is the thing that is, Frank Herbert is similarly got that thing where there's this great political game, and underneath of it is this incredible violence. So.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we were talking about last week is the compared to the West, how we view humans, like how we view life. They view it very, very differently than we do. Like,
Indeed.
Honor, it becomes before everything else. So it's like, you dishonor, you therefore have to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, or even like you would end your bloodline, which, to us just seems absolutely horrific. But to them, it doesn't. It's not. It's just that's how, So,
so let me pause you there and ask you a question.
Ahead. Sure.
It's a lot easier to understand the idea of the guy taking his own life because he spoke out of turn, which makes me think I would not do well in feudal Japan because I speak out of turn all the time. But what's the idea with the ending the bloodline? That's obviously the extra horrific part. Is it like we shan't even let anyone grow up to wear his name because then they'd be dishonored too? Or like, how are you washing your honor if you're ending your family name? Like, whose honor are you washing because you're dead and you don't have children? That's the part I was not quite clear on.
Yeah, it's it's a very, very different sort of cultural. It's a huge cultural difference compared to what I think part of what for me what's going on here is we're sort of seeing things through John Blackthorne's eyes. Like he's being sort of thrust
Right.
into this world, and some of the crazy extreme things. Like I had someone who commented on my last week's video saying, no, to be a samurai means that you honor your that comes above all else. Before, because we were
Mhm.
saying that I thought it was kind of selfish that that guy would speak out of turn like that, knowing that he could potentially embarrass the
Yeah.
daimyo. And that person said, no, that's not selfish. Because I'm thinking, oh my God, now his wife has lost her husband, has lost her child, her
Yeah.
baby. And so I just thought it was absolutely horrific. But, so that's where, like, I guess someone like me from the West looks at things completely different than someone from the East at that time, 1600.
So here's what I came up with, okay? Because this is obviously one of the first things they are shocking the viewer with. Like you said, sort of hitting us like we are John Blackthorne falling into this kind of crazy culture and seeing some of the most violent parts of it first, right? Crazy is not extreme. Let's say it's called extreme culture. It's an extremely rigid control of behavior mixed with an ultra violence. And we can relate to that a lot in the West. We have different versions of that over here. So it doesn't feel that foreign, but it feels like I said, very extreme. And so what it reminded me, here the operative thing is honor. The thing that makes people what do you value above life itself is the question, right? Like what makes people act in a way where they're willing to lay their own life on the line for some greater thing? Well, the first thing is like love. If there's a car coming towards your children, you dive and push them out of the way and you die instead because they're your children. Okay. Or your mom or your best friend or something. Or maybe just a stranger if you're an absolute hero. But so love is one of those things. In this show, it's honor, right? It's honor, the reputation, the honor of the samurai, the honor of the culture and everything. There's layers of honor. And that is what compels people to sometimes value their own life lower than other things, which is counter to your basic instinct as a living organism to protect your own life is usually number one. So in the West, the thing that I came up with as a parallel would be religion. I come from an extreme Christian background, and not that all Christianity is extreme. It's not. I come from an extreme version of what I would call fundamentalist Christianity. And even beyond that, like I've been involved in some churches growing up that went their own direction and got their own ideas and became
I didn't
very
know that about
controlling.
you. So I'm learning
Yeah,
something about you
I have
today.
experience with what I can't believe it's not cult. It's
Yeah.
cult light, if you will. It's like there wasn't Kool-Aid drinking, and nobody was marrying 14-year-olds and things like that. However, it was a church that went into a weird place and was definitely using a lot of guilt and manipulation to control everybody in the church. And it was very creepy, very traumatic for a lot of people. This has, I have many interests in belief, faith, religion, things like that. I went through the whole cycle of hating religion and then coming back around to being like, actually, there's a lot of wisdom there. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The comparative mythology and comparative religion really is what set me straight. You can see like where the commonality with all different people is. And that's usually where you find the best wisdom. It's like the things that, like you said, people in different places finding their way to the same idea. So faith, the idea that there's an afterlife is one of the things that can motivate people to, like I said, value their own life below other concepts, extremely high value concepts. You need a societal structure to enforce that idea. And so if you're in a society of believers, then it's like, oh, well, I might be willing to sacrifice my death or sacrifice my life because I'm doing so virtuously, and I can imagine the next place I will wake up is in heaven with God. And I went out protecting someone or dying for the cause or as a martyr or something like that. Martyrdom is probably the best example.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's an extreme value system that has to be enforced by an entire culture to get people to think that way. And it is very compelling because in the modern world, we've mostly moved away from that kind of thinking. And so it's fun to be transported back to a world where life and death can hang on a word, on stuff like that. It's very just shocking and extreme. It gets the adrenaline flowing.
Yeah, like I was saying last week, for instance, the idea that, when we think of impeachment, we think, a president is impeached and possibly, at the worst would go to jail. In a case like this, if you're impeached, you and everyone in your your clan, I don't even know what the term is, sorry,
Yeah,
is dead.
entourage, whatever. Yeah, everyone
Entourage.
dies.
It's kind of like it sort of reminds me of a Viking burial. Like, I mean, the Viking doesn't just get, put into the grave. Everybody gets put into the grave.
Great example. And it's religious belief that motivates people to do that. It's a combination of
Mhm.
honor and religious belief in that case. But yeah, it's good comparison.
Yeah. So now one of my favorite parts of the show, I don't know what you think of it. Obviously, I love the costumes. I'm gonna have I mentioned to you, I'm gonna have Carlos on next week. Carlos Rosario is the costume
Cool.
designer, and
Yeah.
and they shot this in Vancouver, which is in Canada, my home country. So in replacement of Osaka. So what do you like? Okay, I know we're talking about a bit the story, but what do you think of the show, like aesthetically, visually? What are your thoughts there?
Hold on. They filmed this whole thing in Canada?
They did. I know. Canada.
I guess I could see a similar forest and coastline and stuff because you need a
Yeah,
bit of
I
a
mean
mountainous
it does.
coastline.
It has the mountains, it has the ocean, and
Vancouver,
it
right? Yeah,
has
that's where you
the
would. That kind of
rocks
I
and
can see
everything.
that. I
Yeah,
will
and
try
then
and
I
not
think they
think
did some
about that when I'm
CGI.
watching the show because
I was
I'll
shocked
picture
when
them
I found
saying
that, actually.
a boot this and a boot that.
A boot,
But
yes, and they had a Canadian crew. So there was
that's pretty
probably,
funny.
but then they were serving Japanese food on set. So it was must have been some kind of weird like
Vibes.
fusion.
So what was the
So
question? I'm sorry.
what were your thoughts on the visuals, on the aesthetics of everything?
Oh, tremendous, very immersive. This is one of the we both just saw Dune. So it's one of the things Dune has going for it. It's very
Yes.
immersive, both environment and costume wise. And the same thing here. It's just Japanese costumes are awesome. Samurai costumes are awesome. They are the coolest looking warriors around. Like, this is well known. So it's like, why do I have samurai swords on my wall? Because they're cool.
They are.
They're
I mean,
curved.
there's definitely a cool factor. I mean, I've never heard anyone say that Japanese weapons are goofy, or, like when I grew up, my nerdy neighbors used to pretend that they were, fighting with swords, like they were supposed to be lightsabers, but basically a lightsaber is a Japanese katana in a sort of way.
Yeah, it feels weird, and certainly we should be cautious. Judging an entire culture's aesthetics. However, Japanese culture is very aesthetically pleasing. Like, a lot of care, they put its very high value on aesthetics in their culture. If you look at the constructions of the buildings, the art of the swords and the costumes, the jewelry, the headdresses, this is obviously one of the reasons why you do a TV show of this, because it looks stunning. I'm not sure
Mhm. And
why that.
the edict is that they were going for accuracy as much as possible. And
I
I know
assume you
Carlos
would
spoke to
at
that.
this point in
Mhm.
2024.
Oh
You
yeah,
really
for sure.
couldn't go and make a show like this without, like, you know what I mean? Yeah, you can't do that. So I
Like
assumed
calling it
that it
in.
was trying to be as accurate as possible.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, for instance, on something like Game of Thrones, they go to the shops in England and buy the fabrics from from all the on Soho and so on. In this case,
uh
no. They all the fabric came from Japan. Like
Okay.
It's and like when I had Dean on, he was telling me that one of the saddles that they got for the horses, it was actually stamped 1600. Like it actually was from 1600. And they were so worried because it was raining, because it's in BC, which rains a lot there, that they would have to put tarps on it and stuff like that. But they had actual, they
Wow.
were using historical artifacts in the show, which is crazy, right?
That
But they
makes up for the
wanted it.
Canada thing. No,
Well, the producers are American, I think, though.
it's what about the author of the book?
The author of the book is he's an American, but he had been in a Japanese camp during World War II, apparently, and so this was sort of his sort of story. So, sorry, I'm saying he's American. Sorry, he's British. He is British,
Okay.
and James Clavell. And then the main character, John Blackthorne, is based off of an actual historical figure. I think it's like Williams. I can't remember his name. Sorry.
He was definitely a pirate, not a.
He was definitely a pirate. Yeah, it's funny because I was saying, Anjin means pilot. Like that's what the first episode was called. Which is interesting because my dad's a sailor, like, not like for a living, but like he did it. And he had what was called his piloting license. So even in sailing, you think of piloting being in a plane, but piloting is actually steering a ship. So I thought that was pretty apt.
So let's see. I had a thought. No, it disappeared. What were we just talking about before?
We were talking about the historical accuracy of the show, the visuals.
Yes. So the comparison that I grew up in the suburbs, and when I was 23, I moved to San Francisco. San Francisco is a very small city geographically. It is only 6 miles across either way, and then you have water, and so there was a certain factor that created. People's yards were very small. Nobody had a lot of room anywhere, whether you're talking in the inside or outside. Everything is just very small. But it's hard to live here, and it's a very artistic place. It has a culture of being an artistic place. And so you get this thing where even if people have only a tiny little yard, they do a lot with it. They might have a little porch, but it's covered in cool plants. And, you walk into somebody's house and most of the decorating style is like busy. It's not minimalist. It's like there's a lot going on in a tiny space, but it's very creative. And I'm not sure if there's like Japanese culture. Is there a similar factor because it's a small island and the places where people tend to live are very crowded. So maybe there's just, I don't know, just a long-standing high value on aesthetics. But you can see that whatever it is, or like it's a very ordered kind of aesthetics. It's very
absolutely. Like balance. There's definite balance happening there.
And yet they incorporate a lot of curved lines and things that are clearly inspired by nature as well. So it is not an artificial sort of. It looks mathematical, but not inimical to nature mathematical. There's an organic element too, and so I think I was going to try to bring this back to martial arts and combat. Like martial arts are very aesthetically pleasing as well. It's an aesthetically pleasing kind of combat. And it's similar almost to like Brazilian capoeira, where the line between dance and martial arts can be blurred because it is such a beautiful art form. And because dance requires a lot of the same skill as martial combat. As physically,
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, in Game of Thrones, they call it the water dance, right? That
and we were just rewatching episode 5 where they were doing a dragon dance at the wedding and comparing dancing and combat. So it's a whole thing, and so I think that's one of the reasons why, again, you make a show like this and why it's pleasing to watch is because just so much of Japanese culture is so aesthetically interesting and pleasing and detailed and complex and layered with symbolism and meaning. So it's just a very rich environment to plunge into.
Now, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, so in the 80s version, they just spoke Japanese. They didn't have subtitles. And the idea was, well, first of all, I don't even know if they had the ability to do subtitles back then. Maybe they did, but they liked the idea that John wouldn't understand what they were saying. Like, again, this fish out of water sort of
That must have been
character, right?
annoying.
I don't know. Somehow people figured it out. I don't know, because they did have the translator. So Mariko was the translator,
Mhm.
but then of course she would change things sometimes. Like she would not quite tell him what
Yeah.
was actually said, which I thought, like, there's a lot of, there's a lot of calling each other the names of it, like barbarian, you're a barbarian and you're this, like there's a lot of that back and forth. It cracks me up, like a lot of humor actually. So how do you feel, first off, my two questions, how do you feel about how they managed with the subtitles and so on with the Japanese, but then they've used the English language to sub in for the Portuguese, which was a decision they made. So what are your thoughts about that and how they're
I
telling
figured
the
out
story?
that that's what they were doing pretty early, and I think that does make sense. It gives you a little bit of relief. Now, I'm a subtitles guy. I got no problem with it. I watched all of Dark in German and recommended everybody to do that, as most people did.
Absolutely, I did too.
Because the sound of the language is so important. Like it conveys all kinds of emotion. It's almost like reducing, it to text. When you flip the language like that and have overdubs, it just doesn't work. So
yeah,
yeah.
like one movie I was recommending, I think I mentioned to you, Zone of Interest. I recommended that movie to you, and I was watching Democracy Now, and they were interviewing the producer, and they played a clip from the Zone of Interest, which is a German language film with voiceover, and it actually just sounded so goofy, like having
Yeah,
an American
it
speaking
sucks.
the language. It wasn't even the commandant, it was just his wife. But I was like, this just does not work at all. Like, oh, look at my flowers over here. Yeah, these are, I've got marigolds here, and I've got some
It
vines
makes
growing
sense
on the wall
because
there.
like Portuguese, we're not in Portugal. We're not trying to be immersed in that feel. So I don't really have to do that. Like they don't lose much from doing. I mean, it would add something, I guess. But it's not. You can see why it's like, oh, well, you wouldn't want to replace the Japanese because that would just feel strange if everyone was speaking English. So
Mhm.
it's more immersive that way, and it conveys more of the culture. And then yeah, it makes sense to replace Portuguese with English just so they can speak a little faster and we can pick up things a little faster.
Yeah, no, so let's talk, how do you feel about digging into the characters a little bit here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the three main characters, we have Toranaga, who is he's one of the five, I forget what they're called, the five.
Tornetted. Tornetted.
Toranaga. Toranaga.
Tornetted.
Huh?
Tornetted Stark.
No, I love it. I thought I made a mistake there. I'm like, what's going on? So yeah, so we have,
and Torrhen Stark is even a Stark too.
Torrhen
So
Stark,
Tornetted.
yeah. So who's played by Hiro Sanada, and I'm assuming you know who he is, right? You've seen him. He's in John Wick, and he was in Westworld. Like he's a really highly esteemed
I don't know
Japanese actor.
actors very well. He seemed vaguely familiar, but yeah.
Okay. He was in John Wick 4 recently. That's his most recent role that I've seen him in. So he's one of those actors who is very, established in his own country, but also has a bit of a Western. He was in
He's
The
got a
Last
very
Samurai
strong
with Tom
presence.
Cruise. Sorry?
Oh, sorry. I just jumping the gun. He has a very strong presence. He's a good anchor for the plot. He has that. He's got some of that dad energy that,
Totally.
that again, the Leto, Ned Stark character
Totally.
needs to have. Like,
He is.
got a firm anchoring presence. It makes you feel comfortable, but you never forget that he's also dangerous too. So,
and a bit of a trickster, apparently. He has tricks up
yes.
his sleeve.
Well, again, he
Clever.
didn't get his head cut off. He's a little more clever. He
See,
hid
Ned
the box.
Ned wouldn't have made it.
No.
Poor Ned. He wouldn't have made it. He's too trusting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, it's okay. Well, let's stop right there. There's a different philosophy. Ned is all like, the pack's got to stick together. The lone wolf dies. And Toranaga's telling his son, you only ever have yourself, actually. And you're playing a game of friends and enemies. And that's like not even the game, really. So.
And that's probably what's kept him alive all this time. And
presumably so.
now,
Trust
what did
no
you
one, I
think about?
guess.
I'm jumping ahead. Like, so he's sort of he's not playing the Game of Thrones. I guess he's playing the game of Shogun. But what do you think about this whole political thing? I thought this was really interesting, where the five, and I keep forgetting what they're called, but the ones who are sort of looking after the son until
Little
he comes of
council or
age.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But the idea that they want to get rid of him, they want to kill him, but he has to actually physically be there for them to do the vote. And I thought that was kind of cool. I thought that was kind of a cool plot point. What did you think of that idea?
I was a little
Or did that seem
confused by
silly?
that, as far as why didn't he say that, or why didn't he do this earlier? Just resign. But I guess maybe
Yeah,
like
that's
if he
true.
felt like maybe if he had done that earlier, they still would have executed him on a different premise.
Mhm.
And now they can't really do that because he's not under their thumb. I assumed it was something like that, but
Exactly. So in the original book, which I haven't read either, so John Blackthorne, I just know this because I read this, and also in the 80s series, which is played by Richard Chamberlain, which is sort of hilarious. But he was a big star back in the 80s. So it's sort of supposed to be told through his point of view, his POV. But in this, they've decided to sort of have the three POVs, I suppose. Like they have Mariko and they have Blackthorne and they have Toranaga. But and then I was saying this last week that I'd read that a lot of people thought that the Blackthorne character was the weakest, but I think he's actually fantastic. What do you think of Blackthorne?
I know people like that, so I bought the character. What he's doing is he is trying to survive basically through bluster and just sort of plowing straight ahead. Like most of us in that situation would be like, oh, I better not say anything or I'll get boiled in the pot or, chopped up or whatever. And he's not operating with the same kind of fear that most people would have because he's risked death so many times and stared death in the eye that like he's just, kind of like F it. And I'm just going to be my loud self and demand that they pay attention to me. I thought about this a little bit. He comes across as an oaf at first, especially, and at times, but there is a certain power that the Japanese come to recognize in him, which is that lack of fear and that courage and boldness. And it is a contrast to their culture where power is shown through restraint and control and mastery. And he doesn't appear to have mastery. He's yelling and emotional and he's reacting and stuff, but he has a different kind of power, which is the swagger. And so it's like it could definitely get him killed at any moment. But over time, you see the people around him recognizing this different kind of strength and being like, actually, there's something here. There's something to this. And especially in that last episode where the other pilot was playing games with him, not the pilot actually refused the order and gave him the opportunity to sail his ship through the rocks there. But
the
guy,
Spaniard.
Yes, the Spaniard, right? So he's
I think it's Rodriguez.
He didn't just open fire and sink him, which he could have done,
but
he's sort of just like testing him. He's like, all right, you arrogant bastard, let's see what you got. Like, doom yourself or prove that you're really are Superman.
And it's sort of funny because he's sort of saying what we're thinking, like, what, you're not dead yet? Like, how is it you're not dead? Like, everyone keeps going, we got to kill this guy. But he kind of is a little bit like a cat. Like, he's got 9 lives. Like, he just keeps going somehow. Maybe so he has some plot armor.
Well, the thing I like about him, and he's a despicable character, so we can't like him too much. I mean, I wish they had more clearly. He's almost too likable. You have to remind yourself that like he's murdered innocent people and stuff and to steal shit like he's a pirate. But what I relate to is the sort of operating in chaos, using the force, just like he's very opportunistic and he's very quick to seize the moment. And I tend to live a little more like that than most people, as far as I'm very unorganized, but I like to use the force and be spontaneous. And if you practice that kind of living, you get better at it. So I think he's somebody that's just been sort of making up the plan as he goes for a long time. And so he's kind of good at it.
Yeah, like one of the moments that was really pivotal for me is that in the very first episode, he goes to speak to the captain, and everyone's dying of scurvy and malnutrition, and their teeth are rotting and all that. And the captain is just like, he's completely like that. It's over. I'm done.
It's checked out. Yeah.
But he's like, no, I'll just give you this pistol if it's over. And then, of course, he realizes after he gives him the pistol that he uses it. He was meaning it as a pep talk. But he kind of reminds me of an actor in a way. Like my husband always says, this actors that are very, they just, they face rejection constantly, always facing rejection. And yet they continue to go on auditions, and they continue to, strive for their craft, and they take all these bit parts and do what it needs to be done. And also just some of the things that they're expected to do also, it's just like the average person would be like, there's no way in a million years I could ever do that. But it's like this tenacity. He has this absolute like tenacity. Spirit that a lot of people, will never have. Like you say, we would be like, I would be quiet. I'd be like, okay, maybe they won't notice me and I'll get away with it. But no, I probably would get executed, right? Whereas him, he's like, fuck you, I'm gonna, he calls out the Portuguese. He basically offends everybody. He's a mutual, like what do they call it? An equal opportunity offender in a way.
Well, a great example is the gambit that he launched to save Toranaga at the gate with the inspection. He basically stalled for time by creating a scene, and he pulled that out of his ass completely. It's believable that he would do that because that's the kind of shit that he does. Like he makes it up as he goes. Let's use that expression instead. And
I kind of wonder what they would, if they would have done anything though. Would they have done anything, or would they have just that's it, we're done? I didn't know
if they had found him.
Yeah, it didn't seem like anyone was going to do anything except for him. So I was wondering, like, okay, was that it? All right, they found him. That's it. In that scene where
if they had found him when he was in the box still at the gate, he would have been caught and executed.
That's what I mean, but it didn't seem like anybody else was going to do anything.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, it didn't.
Because he's like, what's happening here? Like, are you guys going to do something? But you're not going to do anything? And then he's like, okay, I'll do it. I'll be the, I don't know.
And I think that's highlighting the limit of the way that Toranaga operates, where he doesn't trust anybody. Remember, it's just him against the world. And so he's told as few people possible about his plan. And so nobody but him and Mariko even know what is at risk there. Like his son doesn't know. And so if more people knew, then somebody would have done something. But yeah, that's what he was realizing. He's like, oh, nobody else even knows what's going on.
Very good point. Very good point. Baya asks, how do you both feel about the humor in the 3 episodes so far? There are some very funny scenes. Yeah.
There always will be humor in a rigid, tightly controlled society. It leaks out the side, and it's more funny for the fact that everything else is so serious. So I think they've got just a little bit of that going on. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things like in Dune, I'd read, and I kind of felt this as well. I mean, people say maybe Stilgar was the, I don't know, the comic relief, but I mean, it's pretty dead serious. Whereas there's a lot of humor. Like I just love all the different names they call. Like there's a lot of vulgar language at times, which, I thought is pretty funny. Like we were talking about, is that historically accurate? It's likely it was accurate. Would they have said it in that, like, someone doesn't give a shit? I don't know if someone would say that, like, oh, it's probably because they don't give a shit. Like, did they say that kind of language back then? But I think the use of vulgar words are sort of funny. There's even like, some of the stuff that's done by the Japanese characters, it's kind of nonverbal, but very funny many times. Just their reaction, let's say, like, it's a lot harder to do reaction as a comedian than it is to be the buffoon, like Blackthorne is. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think, you put your finger on it perfectly. There is, again, because that's just what I meant when I say the society is rigidly controlled, the behavior is rigidly controlled. So just a little bit of a look or a chuckle or a shifted posture can say a lot. There's probably some more I'd pick up on the rewatch, but yeah, that's the kind of culture that we have. And the thing is that a lot of times the veiled insults are the nastiest. Like the British are very polite, right? But like they will cut you up with the polite language if you pay attention and know what they're saying. And if you don't get the joke, then that's even funnier. So it's that subtle dig kind of a thing with polite society, quote unquote. Yeah.
Yeah, like one of my favorite characters is Yabashigi, or Yabu. Some people they call him. He's like the uncle of the young samurai in the village that discovered the ship. And then he comes in and then he's like, I'm going to take all the cannons for myself. I'm going to do all this. And then of course, as soon as he gets confronted and said, oh, are you not serving our Lord or whatever the term was? And he's like, oh, of course I am. Like, he's just totally like folds, like he just completely like, collapses. And then of course he gets the side eye from, Omi, the nephew. And I mean, he's just such a great character. That actor, I think, is brilliant. What do you think of him?
That's the guy that boiled the other one in the pot, right?
Yes. Which is just, I mean, that is absolutely horrific, but he's just,
but
he's
not only that, but like
character.
he sat around listening to the guy scream to like explore the moment of death or some psychotic thing like that. So
No, that's
he
true.
is
brutal,
but also, I guess he's an old warrior. So he's he's one of those characters that mostly thinks with a warrior's mindset, but is also having to play politics, I guess you'd say.
There's a lot now. Yeah. Speaking of that, there's a lot of politics happening here. And it's one of those things. This is why, again, it kind of reminds me a little bit of early Game of Thrones too, in that like say you could be like a Marjorie Tyrell and be, or Tyrell, whatever you want to say, Marjorie Tyrell, and say, okay, I'm going to play it this way, but then fuck, I totally screwed it up. And now everyone is going to die. It's sort of like that. Like it kind of reminds me of, so Yabashigi, there's a situation where he gets approached by, I think it's a Shido, who says, hey man, I'll give this to you and you'll have this. And he's like, no, I'm not going to take your offer. And then he goes back to, to his lord, Toranaga, and says, oh, this is actually what I want. This is actually what I want. Okay, if you help me, this is what I'll do for you. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of back and forth going on. So what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, that's the part where what were you saying?
Sorry, on how they play the game, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, that's the part that is relatable to other series like House of Cards or early seasons Game of Thrones, is that maneuvering. You're trying to back your enemy into a corner and take away their options. And most of that depends on information and whoever can get the best information the soonest. We see Ishido finds out about everything that happens very quickly. So it's like, well, yeah, that's because Osaka is basically his home turf. His province is the closest to the capital. It's right next to the capital. And he seems to be the most connected. So it makes sense that you can't really just leave suddenly without him finding out and showing up. Being like, hey, heard you were leaving. What's going on?
Yeah. I know it feels like though we're missing like a master of whispers. Like I know at one point they were talking about how there's probably a mole or an informant.
Well, we saw the one assassin that has been training for years to do that one.
Can you imagine? It's like a sleeper cell. It's like I've trained. I'm going to sit here until I'm called on to do this, and then,
that's a hibernation cell.
Hibernation cell. I mean, because you would think that she probably comes to maybe care about the family. I don't know. I'm trying to imagine someone being a terrorist embedded, inside of a family or something, and then suddenly like you get the call and you're like, okay, this is crazy, but it's what you signed up for, I suppose.
Yeah. So there must be that might be a character that introduced down the line, like that's a shadowy figure. We don't necessarily need to meet him, but definitely Ishido has a Varys or a Mysaria or whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, what do you think about Mariko? I mean, I think the actress, I don't know a lot about her. Like I was saying about Blackthorne, Cosmo Jarvis, I've only had seen him in one movie called Lady Macbeth, which was excellent. So he was completely unknown to me. I was saying one of the things I did love about him was he has a very, very deep voice. I love that about him. I love that sort of, I don't even know how do you like a timbre, almost like a
It's
baritone.
very smoky. It's rum and cigars and yeah. It's quintessential young. It's a good pirate voice. Also, I hear that pirate gravel in there. So that
Yeah,
was pretty fun.
absolutely.
But you asked about Mariko. She's
Oh yeah, Mariko. Yeah, Mariko.
well, her husband was marked for death. As soon as I saw him, I was like, "Oh, bro, you're not long
I
for the
know, poor
world.
guy.
You're treating your super hot wife like really poorly, making us
And their
not like
son.
you,
Yeah.
controlling her, being threatened by her doing anything outside the house." Corner was like, "Yeah, he's gonna die," and he did, and nobody was sorry. And she's probably gonna have a romance with Blackthorne, and I'll be here for it.
Yeah, Bios's Toda Mariko is one of my favorite in the series. So the actress for her, again, I didn't know her. She is from New Zealand, but she's Japanese, like a heritage. And my husband just watched her in a show called The Monarch. It's about like guys in the chat, maybe you know. The Monarch Legacy. It's about what's the Japanese monster called? The like a
Godzilla.
giant Godzilla. Yeah, it's about Godzilla. So, how many Japanese monsters are there? You nailed it. By the way, apparently Godzilla -1 is apparently amazing. Oh yes, thank you so much. So I know. Thank you, Silver Scale. Monarch Legacy of Monsters on Apple. Okay, I haven't watched it. My husband loves it though. But that's the one. So my husband's like, oh, she's in 2 big shows. That's pretty great. I think she's going to be a big star. So what do you think of her character so far? I mean, she's got like you say, there's something going on between her and John. You know, her husband's dead. We learned that he doesn't really even talk about his wife. He just talks about his children, but he left before even the second child was even born. So it doesn't seem like there's too much importance to him there about family. Like, what are your thoughts?
Oh, you get the idea that like whatever's in his past isn't good. It's nothing he was in a hurry to get back to, and there's probably nobody back there that's anxious for him to come back and play dad. So yeah, it doesn't seem like the type very much. I mean, the story he gave didn't make him sound good, and that's probably covering up something worse. So. I think that Mariko is interesting because in a society where everything is rigidly controlled, the most interesting people are the chaos agents who chafe against those bounds and controls. Blackthorne obviously is like a bull in a china shop, but Mariko is also, initially she is essentially defying her husband's desire to keep her like a caged bird, where it's unclear exactly how much power women have in society. It does seem that she's been trained in combat. So she's not completely kept, which is interesting. And she obviously has a sharp political acumen. And we see that the older ladies have quite a bit of leeway with the way that they can speak and show up late and make a joke about it. And you can see the respect that's given them and the deference that's given them. But the younger women do not get that. So it is... she is an interesting character because we are unsure of how much agency she has, but we can see that she is interested in just in life itself. She's a curious person, and she's probably not just going to be held back and kept in a box. And as far as Blackthorne goes, he is another chaos agent, and that's probably why he's interesting to her, because he is different and he is potentially defying the rules.
Yeah. So Silver Scale say most upper class women were trained with some kind of weapon for safety when the men were at war. Yes, I'd read that. So like when the men leave, they need to basically protect the castle. So I think, but they only use the long pole weapon. Apparently, they don't use the katana,
which looks deadly, by the way.
It is, and the other thing that I read that's really interesting is women, as you see when they walk, they have to keep their knees together, so they do sort of like a bit of a shuffle. But it's also when they're fighting, they do that as well. It's sort of like I guess a Western equivalent of riding side saddle or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's funny. Yeah, I guess
You
it would
know,
be. That is funny.
and so yeah, it's more of a domestic,
So
sort
it's
of
so wild.
defense.
It's like never losing your composure and control, because in battle, that's when people act like animals. And so
Mhm.
even then, we are still controlling our behavior. That says so much.
Yeah, like one of the things I want to talk to when I talk to Carlos is we're starting to see like the different each sort of region has their own color. Like there's the reds, and then there's the sort
Mhm.
of the greens, and then there's the grays. So I want to talk to him a little bit more about that, because I thought that was really fascinating visually speaking. So yeah, so we were talking a little bit about Mariko's husband. Now, so the poor guy, he got left to sort of fight at the dock. It kind of reminded me of a zombie movie, like when you're kind of like all the zombies are coming and okay, go,
Mhm.
go. I'm gonna let you out. And then you're basically there fighting off all the zombies. But I think as in most stories, if you don't see the body, is it mean that they're dead? Like what do you
Mm.
think? Do you think he's actually dead? I
I
wasn't
hadn't thought
100%
about
convinced
that.
that he was.
I'm such a gullible sucker. I just was like, oh, I guess he's done. But no, I guess it is more interesting if he survived. The people he was fighting were like peasants. There was
Yeah,
a
that's what I was
mob of
thinking.
them, but they were
And
not
because they were all
samurai.
standing on the shore as he was on the dock. Like he could have
Yeah.
they didn't like charge at him.
So
So
he
maybe
might have we saw that he maneuvered himself into a tight corridor where he can use, he can limit the amount of people that can come at him. So yeah, he could have survived. I was interested in the character beat of it though, because we mostly don't like this guy. Like all we've ever seen him do is be rude to the babe, the hot babe, and
the hot
she's
babe
not
and
doing
the
anything.
son.
Yeah, and
He's
that's right.
awful to his
Yeah, with
son.
his toxic fucking masculinity
Mhm.
stuff. Oh, you
Yeah.
sounds like a woman at the court and all this. Yeah. Anyway,
And
so
meanwhile, I mean, maybe she's not because she's always very quiet and passive around him. Meanwhile, she was basically in how do I put this? Like Toranaga basically said, "I need you to be this person for me." So,
yes, it wasn't even like she was doing anything at all. Like, yeah. So
but it's his perception of it. He doesn't like it. Like even if
yeah,
she has no choice, no agency over it, he still doesn't like the fact that like you say, he would prefer her being a housewife.
yeah,
I
he's
miss
insecure.
I don't I think a lot of I'm not exactly 100% sure, but I think a lot of the marriages, from what I can tell, appear to be arranged. They don't seem to be like they're political matches, right? They're not
Right.
like love
Right.
matches. So, I
Mhm.
mean, there must have been some reason why they put the two of them together. But the one thing I have to say about him, though, is he's an amazing warrior. Like he is fantastic. And I kind of actually gave him a few points for that. Even though he's not a good dad and husband, I was like, he's actually a very brave soldier. So
Well, so that's what I was trying to say about this scene is
yeah.
that like it's a nice moment because it deepens the character. Up until this moment, we've not seen anything redeeming of him.
Mhm.
But in this final moment, we see a couple of things. One, he accepts his fate. Okay. And he realizes the situation instantly. He doesn't beg and, humiliate himself. He keeps his composure. And then we see Lord Toranaga acknowledge him and call out his name and salute him to be like, and I think in that culture, that counts for a lot. Like to be
Mhm.
acknowledged by your Lord in the moment of your valiant death, like that's a very high honor. And you could see that his wife, even for all that's happened, was proud, honored, she appreciated, and so we the audience did too. And so it's like
Mhm.
we understand he's not necessarily a transparent villain. Like he is what he is. He's a warrior dude. He's old fashioned. He's patriarchal. He's a little abusive, but he's an honorable warrior. And so he's not an underhanded, deceitful backstabber. He's very typical rigid male, heavy-handed kind of dude. And so we see both sides of that. In this final moment, we see the honorable side of him, and it mitigates the other stuff, and it sort of rounds out the character. So yeah, I thought that was good. It was complexity, and just shows you what kinds of things are respected in this culture.
Yeah, actually, and his dad, like, 'cause there's a lot of, like, they're in the palace, but everyone, like, this person's married to this person, and this is my niece, and this is my, my daughter-in-law, and like, there's a lot. It's kind of like, in a palace where you have people who are kind of all related in a way. So his father is Hiromatsu, who is basically Toranaga's like second in command, like the older
Right.
gentleman with the mustache. So,
Yes.
and it's funny because there's a real difference between the two of them. So I'm assuming, I just feel kind of like Mariko's husband there must be some kind of backstory to him, why he's so angry, why he's so
Well, maybe we'll find that out either from Mariko, or if he's
Mhm.
not dead, maybe
Yeah.
that will come back around. Because you're right, he seems very different from his dad. So the apple fell far from the tree in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the things I do really like about the show, is that the characters aren't like black and white. There is a lot of grays and nuances to them. So
Well, and there's
kinda,
the other woman whose husband committed seppuku,
yeah,
like what,
Fuji.
11 years ago, Fuji.
Yeah, yeah,
So there's obviously some sort of backstory that's slowly coming out about her husband's death, which seems to be very traumatic. Like the older woman brought it up again with the polite barbs. The older
yeah.
woman brought up, "Oh, we haven't seen you in 11 years," and it's like, "Oh, thanks for bringing that up, bitch."
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. The older woman. So is that a Dione or whatever? Is it this lady here? I'll show you. Is it her?
I don't remember who it was in the scene, if it was
Yeah.
her or Kiri. But
Okay. Because the
one
one,
of the older women was just, bringing it up very subtly, but you could tell it was also like
yeah,
a
here's
way
Kiri.
to make the other woman emotional and sort of weaken her.
Yes. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Kiri no Kata, yeah.
It might
Toranaga's
have been
wife?
Kiri.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Fuji's the one whose husband just got killed, like committed
Oh,
seppuku, and
so who's the woman whose husband killed herself like 11 years ago?
I don't know.
Is that Ochiba?
Oh, Chiba's the one whose husband was the emperor. And her son now is the one who's supposed to be inheriting the
Okay,
throne.
no. Well, who is
And
it
they
then?
said they had to form the council. So I'm not sure.
So
I don't think she
when
was maybe.
Fuji's husband killed himself, there
Yes.
was another woman that comforted her, and she had a
Oh,
similar experience in her past from like 11 or 14 years ago. Who's that?
oh, that's Mariko. Mariko, her
Oh, is it
father.
Mariko?
Yeah,
Oh,
Mariko's father. I
okay.
don't necessarily want to say this because I don't think it's come out in the show yet.
Okay. Well,
But
okay.
yes,
So I was sorry about the confusion, Chad. Apologies. But
yeah,
yeah,
so
I'm just learning all these
Mariko,
characters. But so yeah, there's
Mariko's
some secret in her past then that we're slowly
exactly.
being
Yeah.
reeled out.
I don't know if it's actually come out in the show, if she said it explicitly, so I don't want to say it just in case it hasn't. Hi,
So it
kitties.
happened to her when she was sitting down in the woman's tent or whatever. The older
Yeah.
woman was like, "Oh, I haven't seen you since, in 11 years." And it's just like, "Oh man." Brutal.
Yeah, that was like, it's funny. Last week we were talking about how you have to sit. Like, it's pretty brutal. Like, just everything. I'd be like kicking tables over and stuff. I'd probably be dead. I would
Yeah,
be,
it's
yeah,
very austere, very
yeah.
austere.
Yeah, she hasn't said the details yet. Okay. And just in case anybody hasn't, I just know it because I read ahead,
Mhm.
And also, like I said, I watched the miniseries many years ago, but
So I'm very interested in the character of Fuji, obviously, because she's been through
yes.
this horrific thing, and we obviously feel for her. But her
Yeah.
life was apparently saved when it could have been ended as well.
Yeah.
So she's like
Yeah. I'm assuming
Medico
she's
had
going
to
to
in
play, I'm assuming she's going to play some kind of, have some kind of importance, because the fact that,
oh yeah.
apparently, like, women don't commit seppuku in the same way men do. They just cut their throats. So she was basically threatening to kill herself because of what they were going to do with the baby. But
Right.
I'm
And so
assuming she's,
I was saying the interesting thing about her and Mariko is they both are in this situation, one in the past and one in the present, of having
yes.
to like find a new purpose in life when according to their value system, their life has been devalued to the point where they don't even want to exist. And that is very intense emotionally. So she potentially could turn into a very powerful character when she regains purpose.
Yeah. Kitty says, Japanese aristocracy during this Sengoku period was crazy. Game of Thrones have nothing on Japanese aristocracy before the Meiji period.
Yeah, it wouldn't appear so. No, either in complexity and subtlety or in brutality.
Oh, it's funny because I was watching a video today on Children of Dune, and like they did it was weird because they married the twins together, and I was like, oh my God, this is so Game of Thrones. The twins married. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, there's some pretty horrific, brutal things in Game of Thrones that are based on historical fact. They're based on Wars of the War. What is it? Wars of the Roses.
I think the most shocking violence in Game of Thrones or the show is the sudden violence that comes so unexpectedly to punish sometimes trivial actions, and it's just like, oh, that's it. Somebody's going to get their tongue torn out now. Like,
yeah.
Wow.
Like you said, for almost nothing.
When Blackthorne was being hauled through the streets, there was another Christian man in the town who was just ran up to him and was just like, oh, are you okay? And then head chopped off. Like, no, you disobeyed the orders. And then you see his family in the background. Oh my God. Like,
yeah. Yeah, they're like the small folk, they just living their lives. But I guess like when you're living in a feudal society, it's like
very
like that head lopping. That's exactly what Silver Scale said.
What's that?
Silver Scale said, yeah, like that head lopping off moment.
Yeah, it was just sudden and unexpected and trivial, and somebody's life was ended, and a bunch of other lives were changed forever. So yeah, extremely rigid hierarchical systems have to have this sort of thing where anybody that has a higher rank than you can basically shit on you at any time, because it just like, that's how it works. That power game, like you have to have like demonstrative ways of exerting the power in a way that people can tangibly see and connect to. And there's nothing more tangible than sudden, brutal violence.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things I was reading about, now, what do you think about this? Is that the battle scenes? I mean, and they didn't really like a skirmish. Like they're not super huge battles. It's not like Battle of the Bastards or something. We're talking about like an ambush or like
the one in the woods was really cool.
That was really cool.
Enjoyed that. Yeah.
Are you talking about the one where they hired the peasants to do the ambush and then they killed the ambushers? Or are you talking about the ones with? I
guess there was two. The first one was cool because he had the face covering, and so everything's going on around him, and he's just standing there. Right?
And you would be able to probably hear it go, like, what the fuck?
The
so
fire
that was
arrows
cool.
in the woods. Yeah, it was all really cool. And then the Tywin Lannister at Maegor the Cruel-esque, like, oh, thanks for doing our dirty work. Here's your money. Now we're going to kill you.
Yeah, I know. Like they pretended to pay them and then they just took them out. Yeah. Again, that was Yabushki or Yabushigi or whatever. So that was him again. He's kind of like a two-timer, don't trust that
Silver
guy.
Scale is pointing out accurately.
The ambushers became the ambushees.
Yeah,
exactly. That's funny.
and then we had saying. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, you go ahead.
Silver Scale was saying, I don't think that was a normal thing that happened even back then. You can't do that without a bit of a peasant uprising. Right. So everything on a TV show is condensed.
Oh,
they had to show us an example of this happening so that we know it can happen. But no, surely that doesn't happen every day,
Yeah, and then the other battle though was the flaming arrows battle. That was kind of cool. And again, here we saw John Blackthorne just like totally like kind of trying to sort of help chip in kind of thing. And even Mariko.
Oh, that's where we saw Mariko being very brave as well. They were both showing a lot of bravery.
Yeah, and but there was, I think in that scene for sure there was some plot armor. It's just like the arrows are flying, and like they didn't have
Yeah,
anything on to protect them.
yes and no. I don't really ever complain about plot armor because who gets hit in battle is totally random. And
It
if you
is.
ever hear stories from actual war, you hear people that get hit a million times and live, or the people all around them die and they don't. It happens. So it
Mhm.
is what it is.
The other thing I really love, by the way, and it's just again, this is back to maybe the props and this, the production design, is all of the really intricate, like beautiful things. Like they're going to write a letter, or they're going to stamp something, or they travel. And I was like, what is that? I was like, what is that called again? Where they live, they put them in the little thing, a peregrine or something, and then but just how like it has a little door that opens, and
Mhm.
it's lacquered, and it just everything is so perfect and beautiful. um what do you feel about that stuff? Like, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I think that goes back to the sort of the care and control and artisanship of their culture. Like every
Mhm.
little thing is a
Oh,
place
thanks. Yes, a
to.
pelican. Yes, because there's one. It's funny. There's one also in Dune, except they put her on a worm, and then they kind of
Oh,
fly off.
palanquin, not a
Pelican,
chin.
pelican.
It looks like Quinn, but it's a palanquin, I think is how you say it.
Palanquin. Okay, a
Yeah.
palanquin. So is that what the Japanese version is called as well?
I think they
It,
said that. I don't remember if it was a translation or if it was something they said in English,
Mhm.
but yeah, whatever.
But beautifully like black lacquered, and then you hear even the sound of them opening it, like looking in and then closing it again. And it's just like, oh, it's just like I loved it so much. I just love the sound of it and the aesthetics of it. And interested how they climb into it and what it would be like being in there. And I just thought the whole thing was very cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I said, every little last corner is done with intent. There's nothing haphazard. We don't see anything that's haphazard in the show. Like nothing.
Yeah, it's all
And I just
intentional.
think that's the aesthetic.
Yeah. Like I know that I was reading behind the scenes that, they brought in like experts, technical experts, like how to serve tea, or how, like, I guess there's a particular style of swords, like fighting, like
Mhm.
a three, I don't know if they call it a three step, or, guys in the chat, you'll probably know better than me, but just everything was like choreographed, like you're saying, almost like a dance. So, writing a letter, it's like, and you hear the like, of the paintbrush. I just loved like it, just the sound design and everything. Oh, what do you think of the music, by the way, David, before we wrap things up here?
Um, I don't ever notice the
I
music on
never
the
noticed
first
the
go
music
round.
either, which
I have
to
to
me,
go back and listen to it on the second go round. Yeah.
yeah, like so for instance in Dune, like, like I noticed the music in Dune. It was like, it was like something like out of
Yeah.
Hans Zimmer. It's like something out of like a Led Zeppelin
Yeah,
concert.
right.
Whereas this, it must be very subtle because really never notice it.
I can't remember them using a lot of strong musical themes that were like capturing your attention. Yeah, I have to listen to it maybe on the next episode, but I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
I the
Yeah, you guys
sound
know what I mean,
design is
right? Like
very good.
riding the worm. They always play that. It's that one song, like it's like, I don't know, like a
Oh,
tribal
listen,
kind.
I grew up with the 80s Dune. I can only hear Toto in my head when I think of Dune. That's it.
I love the 80s Dune. Yeah, I
Oh,
love the 80s Dune. I don't care what anyone says.
I love the 80s Dune too.
That's the hill I'm gonna die on. I loved it. I've
It
been going
fucks
back
more
and
than the new
rewatching
movie. I'll just
scenes.
say that.
What's that, David?
Yeah. I said it fucks more than the new movie.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay. So, well, I think we've done a pretty good job here. Like we've covered a lot. But maybe you'll come back and we can, maybe toward the end of the show, the end of the season, you can come back and we can kind of like, regroup and see, it's hard. Like Tony Teflon always says to me, like he usually likes to give a season at least 5 episodes to kind of really, do an analysis. It's kind of hard at 3 because
Mhm.
um they're kind of laying the groundwork, right? Like it's not really till you get to at least the mid-season that you're like, okay, they're really bringing it home. But I think so far it's been really successful.
I think they're going at a good pace. You have to start a little bit contained so people aren't overwhelmed, and then just build the plot outward. It helps to start with a central location, and then fan out from there. We see that with Game of Thrones. The first book is entirely Winterfell and then King's Landing, and then the story spokes out from there. So there's kind of a similar thing going on here. And yeah, I'm always a sucker for the backstory and the history. So I'm curious to see what the story is with Mariko, and obviously the Taiko. His entire reign is something they've already started giving us flashbacks to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's obviously something that like everybody there knows all this history that we're just learning. And then there's also the history of like Blackthorne and his background, and obviously the English and the Portuguese have been at war, and the Portuguese have a whole thing going on with their church and their feudal lords that they've bought out. So there's obviously
like
a conspiracy there to unravel.
A church in Edo. We could have a church in Edo. The Jesuits.
Oh, I loved it when it was like, that would be bribery. We don't do that. However, we can take it up under prayerful consideration. And then the guy turns and he's like, he says yes.
No, it's back to negotiations. Like, let's negotiate this. It's the same with speaking of, before we head out, at the end where Toranaga shows John that he knows he was a pirate and he's got the evidence for it, but it's going to take probably a long time to translate it.
That was funny. So, yeah, it's like, of course, it will take a long time to translate.
Okay. Well, David, I always love having you on here, and it's so fun. And of course, House of the Dragon is going to be coming up, so you must be kind of jazzed about that coming up in the probably June, maybe. I think they're saying.
Oh yes, I'm quite excited. Arms open wide. Bring it to
me. You're probably going to be pulling all-nighters during that season, like staying up.
Yeah, I do the post-game show right after. So if you're, and I will be having you on hopefully during the season a couple times.
It's a new costume designer this year by BTW.
Oh yeah, are you excited about that?
Yes, you probably know that I wasn't super thrilled with the design. Like, I don't mean.
I feel like they put a lot of effort into a couple costumes, and a bunch of others were kind of threadbare. Is that the general?
Yeah, I think they did a good job on the men, but some of the women, I was like, I just felt like, especially
the women are very up and down. Like Rhaenyra's coat on the boat in episode 4 is awesome,
beautiful. And it's one of my favorites.
Her wedding coat is awesome.
Yes. Yeah, I just felt like some of her, her palace dresses, like they just, I felt they were a little bit called in, and
they were bad and tailored weirdly, as you pointed out.
Yes,
there's a few
yes,
things.
yes.
It's just like, can the princess get a tailor?
Yes, absolutely. You can see
that.
You can see where it was. And also just the weird, like the reuses of some of the things. Like it was several years later, and I'm like, why are they still wearing that?
The same goddamn outfit in so many scenes. It's like, does she have only 2 dresses? Yeah, it gets.
Yeah. So the designer is from.
She should have a different dress for every day. She should be like,
absolutely.
I will never wear that again. I've worn it once.
Like you see the Gilded Age. They never repeat anything. They sell them. Like they wear a new outfit every scene, and then after a season they sell them off. There you go. Here you go, peasants.
So I like the overall look and feel of the Targaryens and the show itself.
Me too.
I'll be happy if they just improve it a little bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the designer's from His Dark Materials. So she's very, very well established. So, and I have an insider who told me that they are super gorgeous. So I'm really jazzed about that, because I don't want to not like them. I want to like them. I want to love them.
Of course.
It's very rare for me to never see something like, there were a lot of things I loved, but the crowns, some of the dresses. Sorry, David, I don't know if you like the crowns, but I hated the crowns.
No, the crowns. The crowns.
Aegon's crown.
Rhaenyra's was cool, but too modern looking. And Aegon's was like, it looked like Theon's crown that he had the blacksmith made at Winterfell in 5 minutes. That's what it looked
absolutely like. Yeah. So anyway, do you want to tell everyone? I have your contact info below, like not your phone number or anything, but your socials. But do you want to tell everyone where they can find you? That's private.
Yeah, I'm David Lightbringer pretty much everywhere. Follow me on TikTok. I'm just getting started with TikTok. That would be appreciated. If anybody is on TikTok, follow me there. I'm going to start doing
I'll
little
follow you.
shorts there. But I'm on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter, and it's pretty much David Lightbringer everywhere. And main thing is, yeah, if you're gearing up for House of the Dragon, then come subscribe to the channel. And if you want to delve further into Ice and Fire, there is more than the surface plot, and it is called Symbolism. So come on to my channel and check that out. Lots of endgame theories, magic, character discussion, pretty much everything. Heidi, I found out that I am in fact the YouTube channel that bigger YouTube channels go to research.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, David. According to
to
Silver Scale, you're a pretty big dill.
Well,
I love dill pickles, so hey, man, to each his own.
I am a fan, also. Yeah, we I love pickles too. Yeah. So, are we gonna rip on Dune, or are we done?
Oh yeah, let's just do a quick little. We'll do a quick little thing just to give a little.
I liked Dune; it was pretty good, but I think I realized that I just don't like predetermination in stories. You know, I had a couple of comparisons between Dark and Dune, because Dark is a time travel show that does work with a certain amount of predetermination, but the way they handle it is very different than in Dune. And this is the thing I don't like, okay? So in Dune, the characters like Paul and his mother and the Fremen are making decisions based on knowing the future or thinking that they know what will happen. And Paul in particular, he's making decisions about whether or not to help the Fremen lead a rebellion based on the possibility that if he does, down the road in the future, he'll become a space Nazi emperor and kill 40 million people on other planets, which has nothing to do with Arrakis and the struggle between the Harkonnens and the Fremen, or just the Empire exploiting the Fremen, whether it's Atreides or Harkonnen. So I did not like how heavy-handed, especially in part 2 of the movie, how they're discussing that it's a Bene Gesserit plant and how Paul knows what's going to happen. It's a weird decision-making process. People don't make decisions like that. They make decisions based on like what's in front of them, what their values are, and what their character is. And so in Dark, here's the contrast. In Dark, even though there is predetermination, as Adam says, the main villain, he's like, people are controllable and predictable because of their desires. And if you understand what somebody desires, then you can sort of predict and control them to a certain extent. And so it's still like the characters are making decisions based on their own nature and their own heart and conflict. Whereas in Dune, because of all this future sight stuff and Bene Gesserit conspiracy stuff, the decision-making processes of the main characters are very foreign and hard to relate to for me. And I don't like that.
Well, I think one of the things I had read is that Denis Villeneuve, he's kind of like a George Lucas in this way. He doesn't like dialogue. He doesn't like dealing with actors, I think, as much as, say, George Lucas that was never his thing, right? He loves the visuals. He loves the cinematography. He loves
I get that.
This cinematic experience. So, but unfortunately for me, I feel like I read a really great article about it, that the story didn't, for me, it wasn't, I didn't feel the story. I didn't I didn't have the buy-in, I guess is what I didn't feel for these characters the way that I would normally, like I said, when I watched Zone of Interest. Or recently, I just watched Poor Things, which is fucking brilliant, by the way. One of my viewers asked me to watch it. It's so good.
Okay.
Poor Things, so good. It's with Emma. She's been nominated for she's won all kinds of awards for it. It's Willem Dafoe's in it, and Mark Ruffalo.
William Dafoe is an actor I know. I swear to God, I do not know actors.
He's amazing in it. Anyway, so I just, so I kind of like, I felt kind of, I don't know, I felt kind of like a fraud after I saw it. I was like, okay, is there something wrong with me? Like, why am I not connecting with this movie? And then I sort of on social media, I said, am I a bad person that I don't really, and I felt bad because I'm from Quebec, where Denis Villeneuve's from. And like, I'm like, I should be like,
what character can you read yourself into in the story? Like, that's where it starts. Like, there has to be hopefully multiple characters with moments where you jump into their perspective and go, oh man, what would that be like? And there's not a lot of that here.
I think maybe that's why I like the first one. I think Leto is the one, you know,
There you
and
go.
he's not in this
And
one.
he's the one who acts more like a normal human. Most of the other people in this movie are so like the Baron, Fade, Rautha. These people are alien. The Bene Gesserit, psychic witches with like eternal consciousness and 3,000-year conspiracies. Like it's unrelatable. And then the Fremen, they're somewhat relatable. You know, and I would say that
yeah. And I mean, yeah, because I mean, you know, I
Stilgar is
understand that
probably
the
the most
indigenous
likable
people.
character, right?
Don't get me wrong, I do root for them. I do root for the Fremen, like they're the indigenous people. You know, especially with what's going on in the world right now, like with, you know,
Yeah, it's unescapable.
Afghanistan with Gaza. So,
No,
you
it's
know,
going
like
on in Afghanistan still too.
yeah, Afghanistan. I have actually, you know, I don't know if you know this, David, but I work with Afghanistani refugees. So like I have
Oh,
families that I support and everything. So
I did not.
it's
That's
kind of
awesome.
like I totally connected with that for sure. But a lot of the other, like Paul, I mean, he's really kind of like an Anakin Skywalker kind of thing. Like
Yes.
I
Yeah,
even found a
clearly, yeah.
picture of Darth Vader, like a very, very early drawing of Darth Vader that I posted that I was like, oh my God, this looks like Paul Atreides, you know, like the way his cloak is blowing in the wind. And Lucas described him as like a Bedouin character, like walking through the desert, you know, with like a silk wrapped around his face, but he was wearing a samurai helmet, which kind of is weird, but
Well, obviously Dune came first, and so there's
yeah.
much been written about the influence there. But at this point, they are kind of influencing each other too, because Darth Vader has entered into the cultural, you know, mainstream and consciousness in such a way that you are seeing some of those visuals evoked intentionally with Paul. Paul, I will say this: Paul is a much better Anakin Skywalker. Like maybe just because of the way the prequels were made or whatever. Like Anakin did not land the way he should have. His whole journey towards becoming. We didn't really see the Clone Wars either. So it's like he kind of goes from being basically an angsty teenager into all of a sudden he's Darth Vader. It was hard to buy. Paul, you can sort of see that darkness growing or whatever, that extremeness, the mentality shifting it throughout the movie. I'll give him that. But yeah, there's not a lot of characters to really connect to. One of the things that was frustrating about Chani is that she became very one note. She's like very just against Paul embracing the Messiah thing. We get that. But it's like, what does she want instead? Because the Fremen did need to rebel against the Harkonnens, and Paul was effectively leading them with his knowledge and his ability. And it's like, what were they supposed to do? Was Paul just supposed to walk away from the Fremen? Like, oh no, I'm going to become a space Hitler in 20 years. So I'm not going to do this. And y'all can just get fucked. And I'm going to go die in the desert. Like, what was he supposed to do? That's why it's frustrating for me, is like, where is the interesting decision point for Paul or any of the characters? I don't know what the other choice was. They're just being forced into this inevitable prophetic timeline, and they're just like, oh, this sucks. We're being forced into it. I guess we got to do it. All right, we're doing it. And then that's the story.
Well, I mean, Chani was changed for the movie. And I know that Denny he didn't want people coming away from this movie thinking that Paul was a good guy. They wanted people to come away from this movie thinking that, you know, he was headed down a dark path. That's why I was comparing him to Anakin, by the way.
So this is the thing, is that in the books, this happens more down the road. And I think what Villeneuve doing is he is rushing this idea of Paul turning into the villain, which is supposed to be really in the next story. And he's pushing too much of it back into this book or into this. So
are you comparing it to like a Daenerys Targaryen type of thing happening here? Where
there is some unfortunate overlap here, where it's like, oh yeah, people that lead, uprisings, they always turn into bad people. The thing is, though, that Paul never feels like Daenerys, even for a second. Like I was worried that it would seem more like that, but when I watched Dune, it was like, no, he doesn't feel like Daenerys at all. Like he's obviously crazy and like angry, and he's got all these issues, which you can clearly see are not going to be good when he gets a lot of power. Whereas Daenerys is just as selfless as selfless can be over and over and over again. You're like, yes, this is exactly the person who should get power.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it kind of reminded me of there was actually something else where there was another show where the men is a Wheel of Time. Yeah, like so in Wheel of Time, men can't use this particular power.
They go insane if they use magic.
They go insane. So it kind of reminded me that like he's drinking the water of life, so that, you know.
A bit, yeah.
So anyway, but like but would you,
if anybody, real quick, Heidi, if I could just say this, if anybody is not familiar with my channel, I have a 90-minute video called "Who is the Real Dany?" If you have not heard, the show ending is not going to be the book ending. There's a lot of quotes and evidence that that is the case. So yes, if you are still mad about the heel turn situation, good, you should be mad. She's not going to end like that in the books. Yes. This is something that Dave and Dan did. So please watch my "Who is the Real Dany?" video and ungaslight yourself, please.
Yeah, but anyway, so but you would watch another Dune in the trilogy. Would you invest in that, or
well, yeah, I would, because I really think that Villeneuve is almost assuming the third movie is going to get made when he's making this movie. Like it didn't end satisfyingly. It feels like it's about to continue on another movie. So yeah, I would watch it. And I did enjoy the movie. Like as a spectacle, it's awesome. I like the Fremen desert fighting the best. Like, me too. Run tactics, like that's awesome. That was awesome.
One of my favorite scenes actually is when they're you just see the sort of the little sticks like in the soil, like, and I wasn't quite like, I don't know, maybe they had done that before, that tactic where the breathing sticks.
That was pretty dope. Yeah, no, it was very clever.
I love that. I thought that was so cool.
And the way they were running from the legs when they were lifting, they had to go and run under them and stuff. Like, yeah, it was all very interesting. Yeah, the safe holds with, you know, in the caves with the birds and stuff, like, yeah, it was all very cool. So you could tell, I'm not sure what the deal was with the birds, but you could tell the Fremen were like incorporating the natural wildlife into their environment and sort of living in harmony with it and stuff. So there's probably some benefit to having the birds in there, I'm sure, that you can read about somewhere. But yeah,
I've got a video coming out on the weekend about the costumes, by the way. So I had a few
Jesuit costumes were something else. I don't know how much of that is just straight borrowed out of various cultures or how much of that is made up. But
it is. Yeah. I was talking to my husband about it. I'm like, I'm a little bit conflicted about it, because I'm like, is it cultural appropriation? Is it cultural appreciation? Like, because we were talking about it's 2024. Like, so, you know, something like Star Wars, especially the original trilogy, they used a lot of Tunisian cultural, borrowings, and even like, Mongolian, like everyone seems to borrow from the Mongolians, but I don't know what it is about the Bedouins. They are always constantly being borrowed from. And so it gets to the point where you're like, I kind of personally felt they could have used it as maybe a launching pad, but then taken it way further. And I'm saying this as someone who knows people who dress like that. So that's why I was like, it feels weird. It's supposed to be several thousand years in the future. And I know people who dress like this, and just sort of seemed like, I don't know. So I just make a point about it at the beginning of the video, and then I sort of dig in a bit. And there's a lot of haute couture. There's some, definitely some Alexander McQueen influence. So I'll have that video out on the weekend.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm an artist, and I connect to other artists across cultures, like mentally and spiritually. Mm-hmm. So I tend to look at that whole dynamic of appropriation and cultural influence, which I've thought about a lot. Mm-hmm. I think that it's mostly about the respect of the individual. Like each individual instance has to be sort of evaluated. Like what's in the heart of the people doing that? Like, is it exploitative, or is it a case of being influenced by something that's amazing and interesting? So yeah,
I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just saying, real cultural appropriation it's definitively exploitative. We are taking other people's ideas, we're not paying them, and then we are putting on cosplay and getting all this glory for it, but not, but we stole black music or whatever. Like, that's
like for instance,
clearly wrong.
Like for instance, in in Wakanda, like in Black Panther, they wore these specific type of Lesotho shawls that are supposed to be like, have vibranium in them, and then they use them to kind of ward,
Mhm.
to like shields. And
Mhm.
those are an actual cultural garment, right? But
Mhm.
what the director did is he went and talked to them and said, "Is it okay if I use these?" And they said, "Sure. And this is what we're going to do." And they sell them actually as blankets. You can have them as throws on your bed, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But they're licensed. It's kind of like a Navajo. The Navajo have
Mhm.
licensed a particular motif in there. So it's sort of like that. So this is where
Mhm.
I sort of feel a little bit like, I don't know. I can only feel how I feel. And I felt kind of uncomfortable. And I felt it kind of distracted me a little bit from the movie. Like, aside
So
from,
some of that may be intentional because, like,
Mhm.
Paul and Jessica are appropriating Fremen culture.
Yes.
And so there is an element that is supposed to be like, even their religion is like a planted conspiracy of the Bene Gesserit. So I think some of that may be intentional. Um,
Yeah. And there was,
but
there was
on the
definitely
other
some
hand, it's like,
discussion about
if you're
that.
going to have a desert culture,
Yeah.
shouldn't you pay respect to the real desert cultures that live in the world? It's like, well, how would people live in the desert? Well, don't make it up. Go look at how actual people live in the desert, and all of their ways probably make a damn lot of sense because they've been actually doing it. So then, of course, you would naturally mimic. But yes, you should, if you're going to use somebody's particular cultural headdress, then yeah, knock on the door, ask them if it's
Yeah,
okay.
but
Of course, like,
I'm just going to give you one example, and then we'll wrap up because I've kept you way too long. But okay, so the Fremen language that's on Jessica's face, the designer said that the art department created this language, but they didn't. It's actually appropriated from another culture. So the tattooing on the face is done by a particular culture. They could have made up a completely new language. Like they could have made up their own letters and
yeah,
alphabet, but they didn't. They took it
huh,
from another culture. And so that's an
seems
example
lazy.
where I think it's being lazy
Yeah.
instead of saying, okay, we want to do something like this is kind of cool. Let's do face tattoos. It's supposed to be the Fremen language, but they didn't. They just were like, and so people were like, that's actually this particular language. I can't remember what it is. I have it in my script.
You know what
Um,
you could do is to come up with a fake language. You could just do like just take the words out of AI pictures because they can't do real words. It's they look they're like Russian letters, like fake
exactly. Yeah.
pseudo letters or
Well, this
something.
is
Yeah.
what I mean. It's kind of like, or, just sort of just that's just one example I'm giving you. And so,
Mhm.
and it's the same with like the Fremen language, which, apparently the guy who did Dothraki for Game of Thrones came up with that language. But,
Mhm.
and then so Denis Villeneuve, who probably doesn't know any different, he's like, no, it's this made up language, but actually, no, it has a lot of Arabic in it. So Arabs who are watching it, they're like, we know that, so I'm just trying to, so that's what I'm just saying. I'm just saying, I personally just was like a little bit uncomfortable.
Some of that
But
sounds
you
a
could
little
be right.
sloppy.
You could be right. You could be absolutely right. Maybe I'm supposed to feel uncomfortable, but I haven't heard anybody else say that they're uncomfortable.
Well, no, the specific things that you're mentioning,
Hmm.
like it should be clear. Like, don't say it's a made up language if it's based on, like, you should have a detailed answer of what it's based on and why that makes sense. Right? Like, well, the cultural dress is from this part of the world. And so we based our language on, they're like, be clear about it. And everyone should be on the same
Hmm.
page at least. You shouldn't, one person shouldn't say, oh, it's made up language. And that other person is like, no, I drew from this and that and this and that. And David J.
Yeah.
Peterson, obviously, we know like he does a detailed job. He does a very careful job at what he's doing. So,
Yeah. But like Michelle like Clapton, who did the costumes for Game of Thrones, she'll say the Dothraki, the Mongols are based off
mhm.
that. The North are based off of the Inuit. She's honest about it.
Yeah. But
Um, but in her defense, she has that as a starting point, but then it doesn't look anything like that by the time she's finished. You know what I mean?
right. Uh-huh.
It she might be like, I'm inspired by something like I saw in a cave, like I saw these cave drawings, and I thought that was very cool. So I used those for the
Yeah,
North of the
in
Wall
general, I
people.
think people are nowadays are a little too uptight about this because it has been
Mhm,
done so exploitatively and grossly in the recent past. And so maybe
mhm.
now we're swinging on the other way. But Bottom line is like
No,
all
I
human
absolutely agree with
culture is
you. Yeah, the
relatable to each
pendulum has
other,
swung. Mhm.
right? Sorry, I was just saying like when you're inspired by something that's beautiful from someone else's culture, like that is fundamentally a beautiful thing, right? It's like admiration and inspiration.
Well, that's
You know,
why it's like, is it cultural inspiration or or cultural? There's another word for it. It's not cultural appropriation. It's cultural inspiration or
just
admiration.
influence. And I
Yeah,
think it's all in the details. A lot of that's in the subtlety and in the intentions and in the care of the people working on the art. You know,
yeah. I think anyway. I think it's going to be. I think it's a good discussion to have at any rate. Like, I mean, I'm not always. I've tried to say this. I tried to always. I never tried to be too rigid. Like, I hated Marjorie Terrell's first second season costume. I hated it for years. And then as time has
oh,
gone on, I'm like, I've kind of come to appreciate it. They call it the burrito or I call it
I
uh,
remember it. No, I was very
it's an
unkind.
Alexander McQueen like inspiration that she took. But again, nothing like it doesn't look anything like the Alexander McQueen, which is why I kind of appreciate. But now Tatiana got me to the point where I'm like, okay, you know what? Hey, man, I'm willing to admit it's kind of interesting. But anyway, David, oh my God, yes, thank you. No, I did not like the burrito dress. Hello? Of course not.
That's why
But
we call
anyway,
it the
so
burrito dress.
yes, the burrito or yeah, it's kind of like folded like a burrito around her and then she kind of has to stick her arms kind of out like this. It's not very sexy.
It's almost like Queen of Hearts, Alice in Wonderland
It
style
is. I
dress.
know. I
Yeah.
know. So, but now, time has passed and I've like, you know what? Hey man, I've come around to it. I've talked about it so many times now in so many videos that I've actually kind of come to like it. So, but anyway,
Right
David,
on.
thank you so much. This was so fun. And also staying for this little extra bonus show that we talked about Dune. So David's content or, his contacts, not his phone number, are in the description below. He's on Twitter. He's on TikTok now. Follow him on TikTok. He is, he's got his little, I still see your silver play button in the background there. Congratulations. I'm so proud of you. Anyway, guys. Okay. Well, thanks so much,
All
everyone.
right.
Have a
Thank you,
lovely
Heidi.
evening. Okay. Take care, everyone.
See you soon.
Bye.